The movie opens with Frank stepping outside to check on his son, Aiden Weaver. Frank and his partner are holed up in an abandoned mine, working. Aiden tells Frank he heard a noise, but Frank dismisses it, saying it's just the sound of work. Aiden insists on going inside, but Frank convinces him to stay outside. As Frank heads inside, he hears a low, ominous growl in the distance. Inside, his partner is deep in his work. Suddenly, a growl and a screech pierce the air. Frank brushes it off as an animal nearby, but his partner, uneasy, grabs a gun. The two cautiously move toward the noise, which grows louder the deeper they go into the mine. His accomplice, now visibly rattled, suggests they leave, but Frank's too stubborn to listen. Without warning, something invisible springs at them from the shadows. In a panic, Frank's partner fires wildly, shouting at Frank to run. As chaos erupts, Aiden, sensing something's off, decides to follow his father inside the mine. Afterward, Lucas, Frank's other son, is sitting in class, trying his best to keep his head down. His teacher, Julia, asks the class about myths and fables, but Lucas stays silent. He's too busy feeling the weight of his classmates' bullying stares. The bell rings, and Lucas, eager to escape, checks his bag, only to find a creepy toy stuffed inside by his classmate. After school, Lucas takes a long, lonely walk through town, his mind consumed by the strange events surrounding his family. On his way home, he picks up a stone and, with chilling detachment, crushes the life out of an animal. Later, Lucas stands before a mysterious door, heavily fortified with locks, and attempts to open it. In the evening, Julia stands before an old piano, lost in thought. She snapped back to reality when her brother Paul enters the room. Noticing her odd gaze on the piano, he asks if she wants him to move it. Julia quickly shakes her head. Soon after, she starts taking down some of her family photos from the wall. Her actions are deliberate and heavy with unspoken meaning. That night, Lucas sits alone in his room, his eyes fixed on the family pictures above his bed. His fingers curl around the strange stuffed toy the bully shoved into his bag. With a snarl of frustration, he violently cuts off its head. Suddenly, an eerie sound interrupts, the sound of knocking, followed by a voice calling from behind the locked door. More banging follows, as though someone is desperate to escape. The next morning, Paul and Julia argued over his medication. She misunderstood his request not to move it, thinking he wanted her to leave, but he quickly reassured her that wasn't the case. Back at school, Julia tries to continue her lesson on myths. When she asks Lucas to share, the classmate mocks him, but she firmly encourages him to proceed. Though nervous, Lucas reads aloud about the three bears while Julia listens attentively. Afterward, she praises his effort, but her expression shifts as she flips through his notebook, discovering unsettling drawings that hint at something far darker. After school, a bully lashes out at Lucas over a toy's severed head, hitting him as classmates watch silently. Julia steps in just as it escalates, taking Lucas to the clinic, where the nurse examines scratches on his back. Julia tries calling his home, but the unanswered phone deepens the unease. Julia, concerned by Lucas's odd behavior, decides to follow him after school. She finds him staring blankly at an ice cream shop and suggests they go inside. While eating, Julia reveals they both lost their mothers at 12, forming a bond. But when she asks about his brother and father, Lucas abruptly stands, says goodbye, and asks her not to follow him again. Instead of going home, Lucas picks up more dead animals, drawn to something dark. Sensing something wrong, Julia follows him to his house. As she nears, a menacing growl echoes from inside. She sees Frank still banging on the door, eyes wild with fury. Terrified, Julia backs away and runs to her car. Back at home, Julia examines Lucas's disturbing drawings, trying to make sense of the dark patterns. Her thoughts are interrupted when her brother Paul unexpectedly shows up. Startled, they talk. Julia admits she thinks Paul resents her for leaving when they were kids. The truth comes out. Their father was a mentally ill alcoholic abuser, and Julia fled to escape the torment. She only returned after his death. Meanwhile, Lucas, unfazed by the events, continues his grim task. He chops up the dead animals and arranges them on a tray, carrying it upstairs. With a flashlight strapped to his head, he sets the tray down. Frank, in a terrifying state, grabs it and snarls at Lucas to leave. Moments later, Aiden sneaks up and starts eating the grisly meat. As Frank's growls intensify, Lucas bolts downstairs and locks the door behind him, hanging a small bag on the doorknob. At home, Julia plays a haunting melody on the piano, memories of her abusive childhood surfacing with each note. Paul walks in, pulling her back to the present. When she asks about Frank, suspecting he might be hurting Lucas, Paul looks grim and admits he knows Frank well. He's the one who always calls for help when Frank overdoses. Julia insists Frank should be jailed, but Paul dismisses her, arguing that no one would care for his kids, especially after their mother's death. Meanwhile, Lucas retreats into his drawings, filling page after page with dark images. Ignoring Aiden's whining for food, he puts on headphones and clutches a baby doll, finding comfort in its lifeless presence. The next morning, Lucas heads into the forest to set a trap, but what he stumbles upon shocks him to his core. An old man with a gun kneeling next to a decaying corpse. Panic rises in his chest, and without a second thought, he flees from the forest. At school, Julia dives into her research on dangerous spirits, studying a book heavy with dark lore. She examines Lucas's increasingly disturbing drawings, each more unsettling than the last. Desperate for action, she takes the drawings to the principal, urging her to visit Lucas's house. The principal, however, remains unmoved, citing the lack of concrete evidence as the reason they can't intervene. Later, Julia runs into Paul at a local store, where he shares grim news. A man's body has been found in the woods, with some body parts discovered at the meth lab. At first, they suspect an animal attack, maybe a bear or cougar, but as the investigation unfolds, they discover the truth. The body belongs to Frank's accomplice. The condition of the corpse makes it hard to pinpoint the cause of death, but a closer look at the radial bones reveals teeth marks. Meanwhile, back at Frank's house, Lucas goes upstairs to check on Aiden and brings him some snacks. But the moment takes a horrifying turn. Aiden suddenly spits up black liquid, his eyes empty and unseeing. From nearby, Frank's low growls echo through the house. Later, the principal, worried by Julia's concerns, visits Lucas's house. She enters through the back door, hearing Aiden's faint cries upstairs. She follows the noise, and when she opens the door, she freezes. Aiden sits on the floor, eerily still, his presence unsettling. Without warning, Frank lunges from behind, his monstrous form tearing into the principal with brutal, animalistic force. As he feeds, a grotesque transformation begins. Antlers burst through his deformed body, an unnatural appendage sprouting from his skull, distorting his already terrifying appearance. Meanwhile, Paul and his team arrive at the mine, the site where part of Frank's accomplice's body was found. The deeper they go, the stranger things get. Bags, identical to the one on Lucas's doorknob, hang from the ceiling. On the floor, antlers, an unsettling sight, add to the eerie atmosphere. The team exchanges confused looks, but before they can investigate further, a radio report about a missing person interrupts. Later, Lucas walks alone through the dense forest, the eerie silence broken by distant animal cries. Drawn to the noise, he ventures deeper, only to encounter the bully leader. The boy hurls insults, but their confrontation is cut short by a terrifying growl. They freeze, turning toward the sound to see a horned creature in the trees. Before they can react, the creature pounces, tearing the bully leader apart in an instant. Lucas runs for his life. Breathing heavily, Lucas returns home to find a strange car outside. He cautiously enters, heading upstairs to find blood smeared across the floor, leading to a broken window. Knowing something is terribly wrong, Lucas quickly wipes down the blood and hides the car, desperate to conceal the truth. Later, Paul and a colleague arrive to check on things. They knock, but with no answer, they assume no one is home and leave, unaware of the dark secrets lurking inside. Paul, investigating the bully's disappearance, heads to the school, but the faculty have no answers. Meanwhile, Julia, troubled by the strange occurrences, senses there's more to the story and believes Frank is involved. Determined to uncover the truth, she goes to Lucas's house and finds the principal's car parked outside, deepening her suspicions. The police discover the principal's body and another dead body, likely Frank's, though its condition raises more questions. As the investigation continues, Lucas arrives, weak and disoriented. Julia rushes him to the hospital, where doctors confirm he's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Despite Paul's objections, Julia decides to care for him herself. Lucas's mind drifts back to the past, remembering when Frank came home after visiting the meth lab. Vomiting black blood, Frank begged his sons to lock him away, claiming he was terribly sick. When Lucas later told him Aiden was sick too, Frank pulled Aiden into the room. Lucas, tormented, could only scream as Frank banged his head against the door. Julia and Paul take Lucas's drawings to an old man who recognizes the antlers and strange figures as symbols of a Wendigo, a malevolent spirit in Native American legend. The creature, once a hunter who resorted to cannibalism, transforms into a mindless, evil force that devours humans. Paul dismisses it as a myth, but Julia is convinced the Wendigo is real. Later, Paul receives a report about a body found by the tracks. They rush to the place and discover the half-eaten body of the bully classmate. Paul is stunned, realizing the terrifying truth that the Wendigo may have already claimed its next victim. Julia waits for Paul, who still dismisses the deaths as unrelated. Undeterred, she insists on picking up Lucas from the hospital, fearing he's in danger, and asks Paul to send him to their house for safety. Paul, though skeptical, sends an acquaintance to check on them. At the house, Julia tells Lucas that her father recently died and that Frank is dead too, but Lucas refuses to believe it. He insists his old dad was sick and mean, but his new dad is with Aiden, and they'll soon reunite. Paul's associate hears eerie sounds, which Julia and Lucas also hear. Lucas claims it's his father coming to pick him up. The associate finds Aiden hiding in a small box, but before he can react, Frank, now possessed by the Wendigo, kills him instantly. When Paul arrives, he finds the body and Aiden, but Frank attacks him.
It's okay.
Julia, tending to Paul's wounds, drives him to the mine to rescue Lucas. She enters alone. Inside, she finds Lucas and Aiden, and as she surveys the area, she spots Frank, fully transformed into a Wendigo, feasting on a dead bear. Julia battles and kills the creature with Lucas's help. The Wendigo spirit passes into Aiden. As he begins to change, Lucas tries to stop Julia from killing his brother, but Julia, heartbroken, insists Aiden will never be the same. She asks Lucas to look away, then ends the curse by stabbing Aiden in the back. Julia and Paul decide to take Lucas in, despite their fear that he might soon be overtaken by the same curse. As they walk away from the tragedy, Paul suddenly begins to cough violently and spits up black liquid, just like Frank and Aiden before him. Did this story spook you out? Let us know in the comments below. For more horror movie recaps, subscribe to our channel, and we will see you on the next one. Fear awaits you.